Reserva de derechos. Una figura sui generis de protección con mucho punch. Alejandro Luna, presidente de la Asociación Mexicana para la Protección de la Propiedad Intelectual, AMPPI México.
Dorian Roldan Peña, Director General from the Lucha Libre from Mexico. Marco Antonio Morales, in charge of the Office of General Direction from the National Institute for Copyrights in Indautor, Mexico. Moderator, Roberto Arochi, founder, partner from Arochi and Lindner, Mexico. Good afternoon, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here at this hour of the day. I think that we will talk about a very interesting topic. We are the only country in Latin America that has this figure. At a moment, Colombia used to have it approximately 30 years ago. Now we have this reserve of rights, and we would like to explain what is the scope. Many of us thought, and I am one of them, many years ago we thought that it was like a patch to this law, and it's not truly like that. It's since 1928 in the civil code and has its background as support, and we're going to understand why. This is on the one hand, and on the other, it's important to establish the importance that in certain industries has. And I will pass the floor to my colleague, Alex. Thank you so much for the presentation, Roberto. On behalf of all the samples, the AMPPIs, we really thank the ASIPI for this opportunity and the coordination and collaboration between ASIPI and the Mexican Association for the Intellectual Property, the group association, the biggest group association in Mexico. Okay, this presentation, I hope it would be useful as an introduction regarding the industry, the advertisement and protection of wrestling in Mexico. Or freestyle wrestling. The origins of the wrestling in Mexico go back to the Greco-Roman times, to the antique Greece, and the introduction of the Greco-Roman fight as an Olympic sport. The Mesoamerican countries were not the exception. There is evidence that the wrestling was practiced in our Mesoamerican times, and this figure is the El Luchador, the wrestling from the Olmeca culture in Mexico. And you can appreciate this figurine in the Museum of Anthropology Art in Mexico. The first wrestlings in Mexico began at the mid of the 19th century. Enrique Huarquechea is the first Mexican wrestler and created the settlements of what would be the Mexican freestyle wrestling from 1922. Salvador Lutero, ex-tenant of this revolution, now considered as the father of the freestyle wrestling Mexico, created the company as the World Council for Freestyle Wrestling. This company celebrates its first function in September of 1933, inaugurating the Arena, the Coliseum Arena Mexico. Freestyle wrestling is not only coming from Mexico. There are other countries where it is highly popular: Japan, Canada, United States, and the United Kingdom as well. However, Mexico and Japan are considered the world leaders of this practice. Freestyle wrestling has certain abilities in the different countries. But in Mexico, it's not only an event where we gather to see how two wrestlers are just fighting. It's part of the Mexican folklore. It's a spectacle. It asks for strength, physical strength, value, and symbolic values. And the Mexican freestyle wrestling is an activity that performs between the fantasy and the reality. It's a tough job. It's a highly difficult art. It's color, myths, practices, sport that has overcome the time and modernity times, and it constitutes a legacy for the popular culture. The Mexican freestyle wrestling has its own features, and we have some meanings supporting the urban culture. So it has a cultural character and features that also gives them the tradition. It's a fight between the yin and the yang, the good and the bad, the wrong and the good. It's performed in our country as a catharsis event. It's not only a show in the wrestling quadrant. The wrestling just skipped and went to the shows and spectacle. More than 50 movies from El Santo and 120 films from this genre with original titles, and some of those are not as original as thought. But we're talking about a whole culture of loyalty. We are talking about art, titles, audiovisuals, theater, music, literary works, everything related to the legal aspects from the industry of advertisement and the entertainment industry. These are well-known elements in Mexico and all around the world. It's a whole industry. We have products and services related with this spectacle and show, from all the apparel types of toys, the masks, the uniforms, the different piñatas, the music, the literature, different artists. Definitely the whole industry by itself supporting the freestyle wrestling that of course deserves to be protected by the different figures of intellectual property. In Mexico, is that relevant that the Mexican Senate declared the 21st of September as the National Day for the freestyle wrestling at the Mexican wrestlers. Additional to this, there's a decree in which it is declared as an intangible cultural patrimony. And it was signed on the 21st of July in 2018. This decree is so important because it's declared as an intangible cultural asset, because by this decree, any concrete measure oriented to safeguard the different cultural manifestations in which we have intangible products related with the freestyle wrestling. This is to say that all of these products, services, the show itself, the wrestlers, the scenery, the quadrants are part of this cultural patrimony of Mexico City. Therefore, all administrative measures and legislative measures should be taken to preserve this cultural patrimony. From here, its relevance that can even have further impact for the IP subjects. And now, just talking about the observance and protection, surveillance and protection, you are expert in IP, so you would know that many of these symbols, figures, number, character, titles can be protected by different figures of the IP, mainly the brands. The class 25 for appeal, 28 for the masks, sport articles, toys, 41 for entertainment. It's also protecting copyrights. And in a fast search in the IP, in the brands registered within the IP, we founded approximately 1,000 registers related with freestyle wrestling, different products and services, images, wrestlers from the Mexican wrestling field. So there are brand registrations for copyrights and IPs. This is a very interesting case, and it was important to mention. It is the son of del Santo. Well, he went to litigation because they were using their images in one audiovisual. But the important thing is that the company was claiming and suing, and they impugnated the fraction for damages and prejudices, and the one that appeared on the procedure was covered by the mask. So some allegations were done because, according to the suited person, well, it was said that we didn't know the identity of who was wearing those masks. So the judges and the court decided that the actor, as he was identified and he was facing the judge, that was enough cause for giving the legality to that claim. So that was important to mention because it got up to the court of law. Now, what are the wrestlers saying, claiming? Why is it important to protect the wrestler itself? The wrestler and or the company create a character that has physical and psychological features. That person has physical and psychological features that pertain only to that character. And here there are some quotes that define their practice, such as the freestyle wrestling is an art of expression. It's a way of art combining strength, techniques, and creativity. This has been said by Maximo. Wrestling is a way of expression and a media to convey values. And this was the son of Perro Aguayo, and he died on the wrestling quadrant, and there was a huge issue from the situation. So you are experts in IPN. We saw the different brands, title, names, etc. How could we protect a wrestler called El Brandeador with the physical features that he is a strong blue eyes with the blue mask that only allow to see his eyes, nose and mouth? Also has, for example, these different tattoos and logos related with the protection of IP. They have the R and the C of copyrights and rights, and or CTM. What are the psychological features of El Brandeador? It's a wrestler that it's looking for justice and the defense of the copyrights and IPs, characterized by the ideas and desire for justice. Is loyal to his principles and is decided to end up with the forthright piracy. How can we protect these with the current figures of IP? we will see that we will have certain limitations when each one of these. In Mexico, we have this sui generis situation, as Roberto mentioned, and is the reserve of rights exclusive of human characters. There are other uses and limitations in the Article 173 in the third fraction, where we have human people characterizing or personifying certain roles in our country. So this is the item or the entry to protect this type of wrestlers, such as El Brandeador, as many other wrestlers in the freestyle wrestling. And it's not exclusive for wrestlers. Even most of the litigation that have taken place in our country for copyright have been due to claims on many characters very well known by us, having psychological and physical features. And the reserve of rights is the ideal tool to protect all of these features that are not given by any other IP is areas. There are other behaviors that are not necessarily authorized by the owners or the title handlers of rights. And that could be very difficult to obtain the legal remedies through these traditional ways of IP copyrights and others. It is true that we can have, for example, the notorious brand or the ideal competition. We have different standards and complexities. To have a loyal competencies standards required a degree of sophistication besides the probatory cause. Likewise, with the famous brand on a notary brand, either it's a justification or declaration on behalf of the authority, you need to comply with certain standards, and also it implies times and expenditures to obtain that notoriousness declaratory or that of fame that it's needed to limit certain conducts. So with this, I would like to finish with the value of this figure of the reserve of rights. Without these, we couldn't be able to protect many of these rights that I was expressing mostly on the Mexican freestyle wrestling that my colleagues are going to talk about in depth. Thank you. Thank you, Alex. Well, we have a guest, and it's the Fantasma wrestler. It's our guest, and I would like to say that he's highly known. He has the award in the Legislative Assembly in Metro Guerrero. Stop many things from the wrestling were advertised there, and he authorized that. So he supports the different wrestlers so that shows can take place in Mexico, and also the referees and the announcers or speakers. During the pandemic, he worked hardly and had some achieved to have certain positive things to support the wrestlers during the pandemic. So we will be listening to him. Tell me, what is your opinion? Do you think there's accumulated protection? Is there not? It's my understanding that the court already gave a solution that there is no accumulated protection. So what can you tell us on this regard? And the most important thing I would like to tell us, when does this figure began or started? What existed or didn't exist in those times? Because it's from 1976, where this brand was known. It's not a patch on to the law, as everyone could have thought about it. Well, thank you for the invite. It's a pleasure to be here on behalf of the National Institute of Copyrights, and it's the office related to the registry of literary and artistic works as its main uh, function. But as you've listened, in Mexico, there is this reserve or right for exclusive use. And as Roberto mentioned, from the Civil Code of 1928 that came in force later, and after Mexico that went through the Mexican Revolution and went through the crisis, within the binding dispositions to copyright matters, this position was settled, where somehow an exclusive protection was given to all those periodical productions that were written in those days. That was on the principle of good faith, but it was no, it was only a control. It was part of the censorship that was taking place in Mexico in those days, because in the journals well was the place to publish any types of opinions, and under this control they had to go through the office of the public education. So also they could issue the permit so that they could release the works. So we're talking about the years, the 30s of the last century. The Genesis passed. Then we have the law of copyrights emancipating the civil code, and when this emancipation took place, this figure continues but extended it to for the title to periodic productions, TV programs, radio programs, cinematographic of film news. And I don't know if you could remember, if you can remember when we used to have the voluntary permanence of films functions during the 70s or 80s, and news were broadcasted, and this was the way where the Mexico of those days were the people were able to receive the news. During the 63, an amendment was done to the 66 Act, and it's introduced a figure to protect fictitious, symbolic, and human characters or personification for the cartoons and others. So if you want, if you can give a click to the presentation, please. There was a huge debate, as Roberto already mentioned, with the people of that works on brands and also the copyright people, because commonly speaking, we have been told that protection could take place through these copyright, its own protection. And we could analyze this. When we talk about art or works, we need to consider the titles and the characters. Commonly, a character that coming from a literary work. Commonly, but see what happened with Barbie. Where's Barbie coming from? If I ask you to describe me Almado Melquiades, you might remember that visitor from Macondo of Garcia Marquez novel. Each one of you will just put your imagination to work, and each one of you, with your own mind, will give a different representation. From that literary work, we would not necessarily have a clear, distinctive features of this character. What the reserve protects are the name, but the physical and psychological distinctive characteristics of a character, not any character. And it does happen. So, how can we realize if there's a psychological profile or the visual features of a character? If I were to ask you who or what is a Pink Panther, most of us, and mainly the millennials and centennials or alpha centennials or beta, the ones that are coming, well, this describe it as the Pink Panther, but the Pink Panther at the beginning was not this cartoon. It was that famous piece of jewelry that from the Black Edward film, where there's a Peter Seller, a great comedian, so that you can enjoy the film. According to the registries, it's that Peter Seller get closer to these designers and artists who have done some bigotes, Porky, and others. So he asked David and the others to ask 3 features: to be gracious, with pink color, and whiskers. So then we have other characters that are derived from different works, like cartoons, video games, and others. Because it's a paradox. The cartoons animated did won an Oscar in 1964 from that gorgeous film in the years of 63. It was not even nominated to an Oscar. So the character transcended beyond the first original work that in those days was a film.
Comic books. Here we have Mamin Pinguin with very well-defined psychology, where Yolanda Vargas Duche is the author of the text, but Sexto Valencia Burgos is the creator and author of that comic. And there we have the protection of the fictitious character as something complementary accumulated to what is being presented. This example will be revisited again. Many in Mexico know him as Julio Regalado, who is part of a advertising promotion, and in due time, a big Mexican actor, Sergio Corona, gave life to this character. What happened then? That the company was launching that promotion for big sales and discounts on July, decided to fire him very easily, but to continue with the promotion with very particular traits to that character. What the company did not consider was that Julio Regalado had registered the character under reserve. And that gave the cause to promote an administrative and civil action against the company, irrespectively from the redressing of damage and indemnation. And then the company at the end obtained the rights, because this continues to be an asset that can be used, where you can convey it, you can license it, and all sorts of annotations are made. And today, this character is held by a different company, different from Comercial Mexicana, which is Soriana. Next slide. But let us go to the quiz of all of this. This sort of characters did not come from a literary piece of work. They didn't come from a comic book, nor from a cinematographic work. Cantinflas, the way he improvised and he was presented in the circus stands, gave that particular trait to this big character, who is who was contracted to conduct more than 40 films that we all know. How do you respond under different figures of intellectual property to a person dedicated to that type of activities that goes beyond the trade subject or commercial aspect? Because according to what has been said, this leaves something beyond the cultural thing. What this Mexican clone goes beyond our borderlines. The next one. Let us see this example, and I will tell you what happened here. Please go ahead.
Si vas a realizar algún trámite en el módulo de Libre, lleva una identificación oficial y un comprobante de domicilio desde tu primera visita. Al identificarte, vive la democracia.
What you saw more than 10 or 12 years ago generated a conflict among the Federal Electoral Institute and the character that gave life to that character, because in that moment the actor was presented before INDAUTOR and had presented the record and had a document to promote an action against the Federal Electoral Institute. As you saw, that is a campaign to promote voting. What happened? Obviously, the Federal Electoral Institute was defended and clearly proved that that character had been created as a demand of an advertising agency from the Institute on the basis of what? On the history board, the character, and the vignettes. In those cases, it is very clear who is the owner of the right of the copyright, but who should go and get the registry. And other cases have taken place. This was commented by Alejandro before. The next slide, please. But the most important thing that this figure gives you is controlling your legacy as a wrestler. In this case, you will see how in due time, if I am not wrong, this is El Ciclón Ramirez, can no longer be wrestling, giving life to his character, but he has all the elements to convey it to a third party who keeps that reserve. The reserve of rights, very similar to the brands when constituted under an administrative action before Lindautor, has a term, and this is renewable every 5 years as long as you can prove the use of it. And there you will have big numbers of characters we have in the artistic industry in Mexico, like Capulina, Chabelo, and many others, who in that regard can leave something, a heritage to their inheritances, being this character, because the character, as it was properly stated, can be exploited in 1,000 ways in terms of brands. You know the principle of specificity. But in a subject of reserve, it goes beyond the class where it was registered, because of all the modes of exploitation that can take place around the character. Here we can see certain data, and the oldest reserve of Santo is from 1968. And as Roberto said it properly, the brands of service, when introduced in the Mexican juridical order with the Law of Inventions and Brands of 1976. That type of entities responded to the needs of a market. And one way or the other, they have it has been built like that and given answer. And now to finish, expanding on the subject of characters. And here we have a fictitious character. We could say yes, it is very clear what are the copyright. I don't know if it is Paramount or who has the right on Casper. But in Mexico, a product of chocolate and marshmallow under the brand of Bubulubu would use not the same ghost that you saw, but very similar to Casper. Derived from the fact that the company in Mexico had this figure before Lindautor. They reached an agreement and they convinced the Ricolino company that instead of being bald, to have hair and also an accessory, that red scarf, to establish a difference and to break the visual confusion that could exist. In the matter of reserves, you not only apply the so-called phonetic, visual, and conceptual confusions, and you can include the ideological confusion and many others. We need to be building. I know that little by little, we will make this figure to have the punch that we need. There are countries similar to me, persons like me, starting to analyze it and to see the convenience of introducing that in their corresponding countries. Thank you. Thank you very much, Marco. There are many questions. Dorian, an entrepreneur. I think that the most important enterprise in Mexico is AAA. Dorian, you have lived this reserve and the conflict, the banking conflicts. What is your experience? Do you feel that this accumulated protection complicates you from the viewpoint of business or from the viewpoint of commercial strategy? Do you feel that it has been, this reserve is an advantage or not? Do you feel that you prefer to look for the brands, or you know that if you do not protect both, you will have issues in a near or far future? What do you think? What do you think about this problem, this commercial problem of accumulated protection? Well, before anything, Roberto, the explanation from Alejandro and Marco was wonderful. And honestly, we are not so belligerent as it could seem in their presentations. In every one of them, we have AAA with a lawsuit from the son of El Santo and different characters, but it answers to the question very well. One of the subjects is, I think that there is a lag, and especially when we study right or law, and when what I was presented before this panorama is a story of my life. I was born fighting for the name of Máscara Sagrada, and today I continue fighting other numbers. And we as a company, what we want to do is business. Wrestling is a show, a sport, syndicated, born in 1933. And today, what we have is an amount of characters, which is the most valuable asset of every one of the companies doing this business. And every time that we will have an investment from a foreign player, it is very difficult to explain what they are and how every character is registered. I remember that when I was younger, we had to make a character reserve of human characterization, where we had to include physical and psychological traits of every one of the characters. And then something happened where we wouldn't be totally protected. From there, in 1996, we started to register our characters, as it was said, in the 25 and 41, and then again it was against that. And all of a sudden, we didn't have to register 3 classes, but it had to be 35, 3, 1, 18, 16. And you were actually, as an entrepreneur, you were spending more money. And let me tell you about a case far more recent, from 1996 so far. My uncle was a person to create all these characters. Well, a very iconic one was La Parca, a wrestler. And this wrestler had differences, went to work in the United States, came to Mexico and presents before Lindautor a record with artistic name, where he was called parking in Los Angeles, estacionamiento en Los Angeles, LA Park. And he was authorized. And practically to us, we had our character La Parca, and with other character which was called LA Park, having to live simultaneously, generating confusion in the fans, and finally to all sponsors. And with that, also, we began to expand our defense to the reserve of the artistic name. And I could continue with the many examples like this. We as entrepreneurs, for a company to continue to give job to talent and generating the benefits demanded by investors, they need a juridical certainty on how to exert those rights they have, that income, those media rights, these sponsorships. And even worse, this is one of the most important things. My first job in AAA was to sell licenses. And I remember that I said, well, this is a wonderful job. All I have to do is take the characters to put them in the different products, and then they start to give me money because of the records we have. No, indeed, we started to lawsuits started to come to the companies because of these problems where it is not clear what are the rights of the person representing the character and what are the rights of the company. And I wanted Fantasma, if I am not correct, please let me know. The wrestler is not clear about what the artistic name is, and a complex entity like today is the intellectual property. Well, it becomes very difficult to understand for him, normal, average human who are not involved in this entity or figure. So today we continue, saying that there are more than 1,000 brands of wrestling. An important percentage corresponds to us, I would say. Today we are negotiating with different funds the acquisition of that intellectual property, and it is the most important resource of a company like AAA. Thank you. What is your opinion, Professor, of this protection, of this idea of having juridical security vision for your wrestlers? You who are always assisting them, are you talking about brands or reserves? No. Let me tell you how I registered my name approximately 40 years ago. Because in the past, for us, the wrestlers, there was not the fact having a document saying that certain guy is a Fantasma. But it happened that there were promoters who, in an intelligent way, would register the names of the wrestlers that already existed. And when they came with us, they would say, you can no longer use the name because I have the rights. But how come? I have always played with this name, and that is why many of my colleagues started to register their own names. Now, something which is very, very clear, for instance, if a given company, to me as a new wrestler, gives me a name, obviously, I know that that name is not mine because there is a document telling me, you know what, this is not your name, I will borrow that. But in the moment you want to leave, you leave, and you leave the name behind. So what happens? That these young people start wrestling, they become so famous, and then they start a fight and say, no, well, I made the name. No, yes, but we clearly agreed that the name was not yours. The name belongs to the company. That is mainly what we're facing. Now, me as the president of the Wrestling Commission, it is not my case to fight for that sort of problems. For instance, when a wrestler comes and they pass an exam, because to be a professional wrestler, you need to go through a technical examination that consists of conditioning, wrestling, Olympic wrestling, and professional wrestling, and freestyle wrestling. And what you see, if that person passes the examination, they need to go through a general medical examination. Now they can get the quality or the role of a wrestler. I have said that we do not have a university degree, but a sport degree for life, because since we were young, you can go to the gyms and we are always training, and a lawyer is always at the university studying every day. So I, for instance, I give the license to the persons if they pass their exams. Now, if there is a fight and if I know that there is a wrestler with the name of La Parca, I will call the promoters telling them there is a person who wants to use that name. So I have told him that in order to receive that name in the license, you need to send a document authorizing him to do so. But if I know that there in that moment there is no any other wrestler with that name, the license is given to that person, and I tell them, go and register your name. That is what I do. Mr. Director, is there any coordination between INPE and author about the search? I mean, actually, we see that this is an ocean of names, of figures, etc. Is there any relation where you can tie, or is there any type of examination different from, for instance, that your examiners go into the internet the way they do in all offices? What type of exams do you develop to grant a reserve? With INPE, by now, we have no cooperation in that regard. But before going to INPE, we are turning to the Commission of Professional Wrestling in Mexico City. And like that, we would have to do so with the different commissions that could exist in the Republic. Because the information, the first-hand information, we have it with Mexico. As everything in terms of registry, we could be surprised. Every step before us, we start from good faith of the person conducting that application. But what we are currently doing, in particular with subjects of characterization, characters related to wrestling, is having a far more direct communication with the Commission. And not only for the granting of the license, but for certain procedures that start to be managed in order to annul or cancel those records that were ill granted. Because information, we don't have that. Information of historical nature, which is notorious. For that, we will be supported with this opinion, with this commission, because the commission is a different authority, and in that regard, we will start with close cooperation to prevent what Dorian properly said, that type of situations where we are not perfect. And yes, all of a sudden, as everything in life, they find certain gaps that give benefits, not necessarily to the person holding the right. Hey, Alex, and if you observe, we have a federal law for copyright that establishes that the registry is a statement. And on the other hand, we have a reserve of rights that is a constitutive of rights. Do you feel that there is not an actual technique on the side of the legislator? Do you feel that you can compare it with the brands? Do you feel that there is a conflict with the industrial property law? Or do you feel that the fact that there is not something to oppose them, there shouldn't be a constitutional problem? What is your view about this aspect? Thank you, Roberto. Well, I consider that those are entities that complement each other. There is not a contradiction in its nature, nor in the way they are legally constituted. Those are entities that are intended to protect different rights. So from the viewpoint, there is no constitutional contradiction, but they complement to each other. The important thing here is the subject of conflicts, because both laws have their barriers to prevent that a brand registry is granted for a previously granted reserve, and the other way around. There are also general principles for the annulation or cancellation of reserve of rights if they violate a given right. But when we teach the first classes lesson. Gentlemen, this is intellectual property, lato sensu, stricto sensu, the copyright. Lato sensus, we have industrial property, the copyright. Where would you place the reserves? Wouldn't be that a distinctive seal? No, they are where they should stay. That is not because of the matter, but because its destination, its object is distinguishing, right? So it would be interesting to see, because I have never seen a revision. Oh, yes, I have never seen that somebody says that the reserve seen in the distinctive signs. I have never heard that, but I have never heard that. Why is that? Because they are in the sphere of the copyright. What would you think if today we see that here? This is Mr. Martin Dichaus, who would say sometime Mr. Michaus has said that the reserve is a distinctive sign. Never, right? Never, right? Precisely, it confirms your initial question. The reserves are where they should stay. We saw that with example of the brandeador, who wanted to add an image of yours with the image of Brander, but he had no authorization to do that. But those ecological features it is possible to protect them through the law. So therefore, the reserves are where they are, and this is an entity, a sui generis entity, and this is why they're there. Now, what is the situation with the controversy existing? But that is more administrative, which is that the observance is made by the Mexican Institute of Industrial Property and not the Office of Copyright in our country. But that is an administrative matter. Well, I tell you, because a lot of people will say, why MP is doing your job, Marco? Why do you give your laundry to the MP? Would you tell us what happened with Mr. Serrano Magallanes at that time and his comments that might be very clear to you, and several of us do? Why don't you tell us and our friends why MP conducts the observance? Sorry. Your microphone, please. We will not go deep in history, but we have used the infrastructure and experience of that administrative authority for the safekeeping of rights. In addition, according to the top that existed at that time, it would be ill seen that an authority within, because we were within the public education ministry, to impose sanctions for the non-authorized installation of computing software in the Mexican public schools. And that was part of the decision to create the so-called infractions in the matter of commerce and give them to the authority that was sectorized in the environment of economy. Dorian, what would you like? What would you like to have? A reserve called brand, or a brand called reserve, or something stating, I have enough with one of them and I have no issues? What would you like? You are leaving me in the middle of the discussion, but no, the reality is that we are looking for legal certainty, the simpler and easiest way for the entrepreneur to register the characters and having certainty and paying less fees of lawyers. That is important as well. The less issues we have, we will always want to simplify. Now, talking about financial certainty, I want to put another subject on the table, which is related precisely with what you were asking, Roberto, with the nature of this. Call it a registry of a brand, or the reserve to the exclusive right of in the subject of wrestlers. I wonder what happens when in these features, the physical features initially, in the reserve, there is a wrestler wearing a mask that identifies him with an original character, and therefore getting the reserve. But here El Fantasma will be able to tell us that there are these struggles where you can lose the mask or your hair. What happens when you lose that mask and the wrestler continues his functional activity, but now without a mask, which would protect his reserve with features, with physical features and psychological features, but can no longer use the mask because lost in a match. And the same, and the answer might be simpler, and the same for registry of brand. Then you lose the brand that you are what the mask is protecting, and it is no longer used. So you lose the registry because of lack of use. So those are some of the questions that take place in the everyday. And that is why I would like, Dorian, if you can tell us about what's happening in reality. Well, the reality is that the reserve of rights, the brands, we use them both for the exploitation with the wrestling and for the third things. Today, La Parca died in 2020, and even like that, we can produce cartoons, video games, and products with the image of La Parca. But you have the case of other wrestlers. I give the case of Cibernetico, who used his mask for a long period and no longer uses the mask, and he is in the right that any third party can use it, called the son of Cibernetico. Cibernetico Jr. can license any third party to use that image. Here, where we enter in debate with the Wrestling Commission in Mexico City is how long if the wrestler that lost that mask can use it or no longer use it. But that goes to a totally different framework, which is in the sphere of El Fantasma, of how long can go by without using that in a ring. But outside the ring can use it with no issues. And another interesting part that was told, the truth is that El Fantasma has made exceptional work in his task as the commissioner for Mexico City. He has many years already, and something that I applaud to him is, and correct me if I am wrong, Fantasma, you are also the commission has practically no budget from any organism. So the fact that the gentleman can keep a historical record of all the characters, the reality that is that it is an effort of the commission led by El Fantasma. It would be a panic that after El Fantasma, somebody with no budget, how to continue with that historical collection.
Well, first of all, we were talking about how can the institute and the commission agree. The Ciclón Ramiro years ago used mask and then he retired. So some people arrived to the institute and wanted the name of the Ciclón Ramirez. What happened? I told them, wait, hold on, I will locate or ask to the older Ciclón Ramirez, and I called him by phone, and Marco, you introduced them, and Ciclón Ramirez, and the person gave Ciclón the name of Ciclón Ramirez Jr. through a document, and that was like the agreement. Now, regarding the mask, when I arrived to the commission, first of all, my position is honoris causa. I'm representing one of the most popular sports, that is the freestyle wrestling, and I'm really thankful, and I have gratitude because it has given me everything. So when I arrived to this wrestling commission, a wrestler that would lose the mask could have another mask for 5 years with another character. When I said, wait, that it couldn't be possible because that is fraud to the public. So many were losing the mask, and after 5 years, they were just asking for another one. Here I say, you cannot lose any longer the mask after 5 minutes. Sometimes they use the mask as presentators, etc., but they cannot fight with the mask once they have lost it. And this is how we are managing the use of a mask. When a new wrestler arrives to the commission to ask for the license that was one and wants a similar name to a previous wrestler, I have to say, no, you have to choose another name. If I can give you, I can give you another name. If there is a previous wrestler with a license, they have to change their name, and that's an agreement. Doctor? are you pleased to handle internally these litigations, or do you think it could do the litigation regarding nullities? Because infractions are given by the INPI. I have a comment that I have expressed previously. There was a recent reform in 2020, sorry, and where the registration of works and copyrights changed with the lobbying of some authorities. So it stated, well defined, it would be a continuous administrative adjustment. So everything was going to be dealt with the administrative purpose instead of federal courts. Mainly the tribunal court from the federation, and I asked the tribunal because the reserve of rights were supposed to be handled in an impugnation or an objection. An objection because they could go directly to the specialized area instead of worrying out an internal procedure that would take a year and a half, even 2 years, so that administrative act to go to the objection to be asked for the review. And it's a procedure that would take longer time because after the sala or the room, they go to the amparo before the judicial legal power. So what you're saying is if the copyrights have to be objected, yes, because they are declaratives. There's no nullity procedure. I have to go to the special room or arena, and that should be the same thing applied for the reservable rights, to go directly to the special rights. And here we have the magistrate Elizabeth. It's magistrate of the specialized rule for intellectual property and copyright. So thank you for your presence. Okay, yes, and this is a merely administrative act that constitutes the law. Before the specialized rooms, we are working more with civil agreements between particulars, and everything is starting to be solved before an administrative tribunal, while the acts should be recognized if they pertain to the intellectual property differently. So do you think there's no legal way? Do you think there's a limitation, or it is something that it's missing, or do you feel that considering prejudice and damages, civil claim can cover all the damages? Well, sometimes it's not typified. I think that with Dorian, with the company, we had a very poor experience with the son of El Santos. I don't think that this can. Sometimes we also do legal engineering so that we can handle different topics, not topics related to certain brands. But I mean, we have a case that was presented before the company that he represents, but it's another situation. In fact, I did my work my thesis. How can you typify and falsification felony with the freestyle wrestling? This lack of legal certainty is what leads us as entrepreneurs to be very attentive of what's happening in the legal framework of IP. Something that I have to acknowledge is that years ago, it, well, it was completely different on how we handle nowadays these conflicts. So at a certain moment when we would have to create new characters, we should have the security that both the wrestler have very clear, defined rights, what he or she can do, as well as the company, so that you can explode these intangible goods and assets that are very valuable for us. The final comment. I coincide that many of the contagious procedures shouldn't be at the administrative authority, but at the legal or judicial tribunal. But not that as an administrative management. I believe that a sanction due to an infraction of a violation of copyright should be sanctioned with a crime as a crime felonies. And for that, we should need a specific type of crime that doesn't exist. I think that the reserve to the exclusive right figure that we have, the now it's the unique one and should prevail. It has its value, its use for many resources and for many remedies that cannot be done in the traditional way for the to avoid, for example, that we have a porno movie of Barbie or the half of a Superman announcing a cinema theater with to avoid using, for example, the character of certain wrestlers, etc. So this is something that needs to be deeply studied. We know how everything can be impacted when losing the mask. Also, for example, when registering the brand, the accumulated protection is very welcomed. It's not contradictory at all. And even according to our own law and the international agreements written by Mexico, protections are the minimum standards. If we can obtain additional protection, that would be, well, ideal. So I do not consider that there's no constitutional topic. That's why the reserve should, well, continue existing. So what happened when, well, the reserve can be obtained not only by the wrestler but the company. But what happens when you lose someone loses the mask, and these physical features are corresponding to the person, to the wrestler himself? So can the company continue or maintain the rights over the physical features of the person, the brandeador without a mask? Because the person is the one that is carrying out the activity in the professional and daily life. Can they preserve the title of the reserve of rights or not? These are things that we are questioning in the tribunals. Well, the court already established in the Arjona case the interpretation of what the image is. What the court established as something compulsory is that the image of a character. Sorry, but he's just not speaking on the mic. And in La Chilindrina case, during the process, it was considered that María Antonieta Las Nieves had given her own features of his own personality to the character, and that was a problem that she was stating with the Chespirito. And I don't know if Dorian, you have any other comments on this regard, but the Latin lover, another wrestler that uses no mask. And when he wants to fight by himself, he said, no, we have the rights, the reserve of rights. Yes, but it's me. I'm the Latin lover. I have no mask, and this is what I do for my living. So there are certain interesting conflicts that are taking place in his arena. Well, I think that intellectual property, either we call it brands or reserves, is one of the assets that could create higher values in our society and the economy. Something that I've always been hearing in discussions when you hear these North American brands, Barbie, Batman, or whatever, are companies that worth thousands and billions of dollars because of that intellectual property that was created throughout the different years. Unfortunately, I haven't seen these examples taking place in Mexico with very famous characters with such as Memín Pingüín, the different wrestlers, El Santo, Blue Demon, Cantinflas, Juan Gabriel, El Chavo. I've always found that there is legal conflict for intellectual property with all these brands and all these characters that have been created during decades of years. I will invite you all to see in which way we can create intellectual property through the figures to the creation of brands, or how can we create this value that we are willing to have as entrepreneurs. What I recommend to the new wrestlers is for them to register their name, copyrights, and the rights for brands, because sometimes they have the copyright, but then another person has the right for the brand. So that's a conflict. So this is my recommendation to the new wrestlers. Most of the problems with famous wrestlers they know that the wrestlers, it's not their name, but it's famous, and say, well, the name is mine, and is where we have of the lawsuits, the different claims.
Y una persona que pierde la máscara, si yo...
And a wrestler losing their mask. If I have my name, either with mask or no mask, I will stick to my name, and I can just have the ownership of it. Well, thank you so much. I invite you all to continue with this debate and this dialogue, because we have to look for the positive sides of the different legal property, so that we can meet the needs of each one of the people that is coming close to us. In this case, all the wrestlers that are behind a mask. It's the biggest patrimony that they have, and this is something that can leave in heritage. Thank you, Marco. An applause to everyone. Thank you. Thank you. We're closing mic, and see you tomorrow, I guess.
I'm breaking all the chains. We cannot stay the same.